Thanks to those who are introducing themselves in the chat. I see that we have folks from all across the country with us today: North Carolina, Arizona, Oregon, California, New York, New Jersey. Please continue to introduce yourself in the chat. It's really great to see so many of us coming together for this important conversation. I think with that, we're ready to begin. Welcome everybody to today's webinar entitled Practical Strategies to Bolster Youth, Family, and Community Partnerships in Residential Facilities. My name is Michael Ampere. I am the director of the Center for Juvenile Justice Reform at Georgetown University's McCourt School of Public Policy. And on behalf of CJJR, I want to welcome you to today's discussion, which really centers on a critically important dimension of our work on behalf of system-involved young people and families. At the center, we know that meaningfully partnering with young people, families, and communities is an essential element of the work. And this can take many forms and can happen at different stages of the system. But for today's conversation, we are focusing on what can be done at the facility level to meaningfully and authentically partner with young people, with families, and with community members. And so we're so thrilled that you're with us today for this conversation. What we'd like to do is to highlight practical strategies that are currently being implemented across the country in this vein. And we'll do that in partnership with a set of amazing leaders from two jurisdictions that we have partnered with at Georgetown over the years, including from Bexar County, Texas, which includes the San Antonio area, as well as folks from the state of Utah. What's really special for us at the center in highlighting the work happening in Bexar County and in Utah is that we have worked with these jurisdictions over the years, including through our Youth in Custody Certificate Program. And in fact, as you'll hear a little bit later, these teams will be represented in the Youth in Custody Certificate Program that we're hosting in Washington, D.C. in July. Applications for the program are currently being accepted. We'll say more about this opportunity at the conclusion of the webinar, but it's just really neat for us to be able to feature the great work of these amazing leaders and the respective teams that they work with back home. Joining us today from Bexar County, Texas, is Jill Mata, who's the Chief Probation Officer within the Bexar County Juvenile Probation Department. Tamara Vasquez, who's the Facility Administrator at the Crier Juvenile Correctional Treatment Center, which is a facility that's operated by the Bexar County Juvenile Probation Department, and Jamie Lyon, Clinical Manager at the Crier facility. And representing Utah is Brett Peterson, Director of the Utah Division of Juvenile Justice and Youth Services, and Jill McKinley, who's the Program Director within the Office of Secure Programs at Utah JJYS. We don't have time to go into an extensive coverage of their bios, but suffice it to say that all of these leaders have incredible experience and expertise. And if you note in the chat, CJJR's Natasha Kinmont has placed the bios of our speakers there if you're interested in learning more about who these amazing folks are. So the way that this webinar will unfold is that we'll start with an overview of a useful framework to think about when it comes to engagement of young people, families, and communities, including a framework that can be applied at the facility level. CJJR's Christine Humowitz will be leading that coverage of that framework. And then we'll launch into a conversation with these leaders from Bexar County and from Utah around the types of strategies that they're implementing in the facilities that they operate. We do want to mention that this webinar is being recorded. So for those of you who have colleagues who were unable to join us live today, please let them know that there will be a recording and that we'll disseminate it through the CJJR website and through our listserv. So we always want to make those resources available to the field. And keep in mind that we also will have a Q&A period at the conclusion of the webinar. We want to hear from you. We won't be opening up the phone lines, but we will be accepting all of your written questions. So as the conversation unfolds, please don't be shy with submitting those questions right in the chat. We'll be monitoring those and we'll try to address as many as possible. So thanks again for being with us. Thank you for your commitment to this body of work. And with that, I'll turn it over to Christine to frame the issue and to get us started.
Thanks, Michael. And hey, everyone. My name is Christine Humowitz, and I am a program coordinator on the certificate program team at the Center for Juvenile Justice Reform. So I would like to ground the discussion we'll be having today with Utah and the folks from Bexar County, Texas, in this continuum of engagement. And so we've modified it from a couple different models in the mental health space to demonstrate that there are lots of different kinds of ways that you might be engaging with youth, families, and community members or organizations. And there are different depths at which that engagement might be occurring. So this model lays out kind of 3 different tiers of engagement, if you will. So the first tier I'll highlight is this outreach tier. In this tier, this is really system officials asking youth, families, and community members for their feedback or their perspectives on a specific issue. So here you might be conducting some kind of survey or a focus group of youth, families, and community members who we also refer to as lived experts at CJJR, in case you hear us use that language later on. So you're asking those individuals for their feedback through some kind of survey or focus group mechanism or any other way that you might gather that information. Kind of stepping off of that, this second tier builds on that outreach. So in the second collaboration area, you're taking the feedback that you're gathering from that initial outreach that you did to your lived experts and are using that feedback and that expertise to inform policy and practice changes you hope to make within your facility or in your agency as a whole. So here you're also more regularly consulting with your lived experts. Like I said, in the outreach stage, this might be something you're reaching out to your lived experts for their expertise and their opinions on maybe just one item you're thinking about making modifications to in your agency. But in this collaboration portion, this becomes a little more routinized, and you're asking for youth and family and community input and feedback for multiple different aspects of your work. And then finally, moving to this third shared leadership tier. In this tier, we as system, y'all as system officials would be regarding youth, families, and community members as equal decision-making partners to all of your other system stakeholders. So engaging youth, families, and communities as those equal partners and giving them seats at the table with all of your other decision makers, giving them the support that they need to be able to advocate for themselves in those spaces. And so creating kind of a mutual exchange of knowledge with those lived experts. So in these first 2 tiers, systems are kind of gaining insight from lived experts. But in this third tier, that goes a step further, really offering lived experts any kinds of support they might need, any professional development opportunities that might be helpful for them as they advocate for themselves and what they need and what they'd like to see in the youth legal system. And then finally, in this third tier, this is a space where we're creating a really sustained feedback loop with families, something that is actively planned for and integrated into the work of a facility or an agency for several years and in several different kinds of ways, impacting many different aspects of policy and practice. So that's kind of a brief overview of this model to get us started. The last thing I'll say about this model is that it's meant to be kind of a cycle. You might get to this third shared leadership stage in some kind of way. For example, you might implement a youth council within one of your facilities, and your youth council might tell you that the youth in your facilities are experiencing something or feeling a way that you might not have anticipated or might not have thought of before. And so you might loop back to this first outreach phase to reach out to more of the youth in your facility to say, hey, this is what we heard from the youth council. Is this what you're experiencing? And if so, what can we do about it? So kind of launching you back into this continuum and cycle of engagement. So with that kind of framing in mind, I'd love to go ahead and turn to our panelists to kind of get a broad overview of what engagement looks like in y'all's agencies. So I'll start with Brett and Jill from Utah JJYS. If y'all don't mind jumping into kind of a brief overview of some strategies you might use around youth, family, and community engagement and how that relates to kind of your overall culture as an agency.
Yeah, that sounds great. Hopefully you can hear me okay. Thank you, Christine, for the introduction. Yeah, I think that we'll be able to get into some more of the kind of meat of some of these strategies as we go along. The first thing I would say is that the great part of this conversation today, like this is the good stuff in our work. You know, this isn't a webinar about room confinement. This isn't a webinar about, you know, ending isolation or something, which are all critical, right? There's all these safety components. This is the stuff that is at the heart of our work, of like the why we do it. We want to see young people change. We want to see them positively impacted. And when you develop that culture of positive youth development, you know, that can infuse your whole system, but you're not going to be able to do that without youth voice. You're not going to be able to do it without a system that is centered on those you serve. And juvenile justice is unique in the sense that, you know, young people are coming to us and literally, like, the system, the court system is saying, here's this young person, you are meant to deal with them and them alone, right? Like, that's your jurisdiction. So jurisdictionally, that's the only person that's in front of you. But we know how, like, that's a farce, right? Like, they're part of a broader system, a community, a family. And so we have to be deliberate and intentional. And so we'll be able to talk a little bit later today about the things we did. The core, the big gear for us is our child and family team process. Like, that's the big gear. Then you get into specific strategies like our youth council. And then we'll even talk about, we hope if we have time, we'll see about like an example of like a family night, some kind of family engagement. And Jill will be able to, Jill McKinley from Utah, she will be able to share, as we get into kind of a little more of the heart of it, some of the more specifics around those items.
Awesome. Thank you, Brett. Yeah, lifting up that positive youth development framing early in this webinar, I think is so important and really something that should undergird kind of all of this engagement work. So Jill Mata from Bexar County, what about y'all? What kind of strategies do you use? How does that tie into your kind of broader culture?
Yes, I'll reiterate what Brett said. Our sentiments exactly here in San Antonio and Bexar County. We also have been really committed to bringing a lot of partners to the table to tie them into our broader message. And of course, we're working with county kids. So these are children that are mostly from our close jurisdiction, you know, that are there with us. And we implemented some similar ways to bridge that gap. We have a youth council. It was developed more than a decade ago, and it was enhanced over time. And that council has been involved in making very specific suggestions to program development and to the physical environment, and also to the incentive program. And a little bit later, you'll hear from Jamie and from Tamara, you know, about how that actually works. But it's been really effective. And a lot of those ideas came about from some of the work that we've done with CJJR. In that particular system, the children actually vote on their representatives, and they develop specific expectations and bylaws and requirements and consequences for the involvement in the council. So it's really interesting, and they'll expand on that more. With regards to the community partnerships, those have been an integral part of what we do. They're very much tied into the rehabilitative and restorative work at the Crier Center, at our post-adjudication center. Some of those programs include very much like enrichment activities. We have a poetry writing collaborative that has existed for quite some time, and it's grown over time. And Tamara and Jamie both can talk a little bit more about that and the impact on the kids. We have a theater program that is not in-house, it's tied to the community. So there's that bridge to the community where when the children have a positive experience with it, they could follow up with it in the community. And we had a choice to make on many of these things. They could have been done in-house, but we specifically, even though it was harder, made the decision to bridge with the community because you want that to be there for kids when they're no longer in justice. The whole goal is to get them out of justice and support supported by the community. There's an art program we also have, and Epiphany Ministries and other churches are involved with spiritual development for the kids. And we have therapy animals, like therapy dog program, which again, we decided to do out of house for that reason. And this was made possible really by working with some collective impact organizations that can provide backbone support. So we can talk a little bit more about that in a little bit, but we really focus on this shared responsibility. We've joked that we have a really high tolerance for chaos and disagreement. And if you just really keep that approach to things, that disagreement, and I say chaos with a small c, but with that disagreement, that's really where you get to the heart of the matter and where you get one another. Then all the players sort of trust one another because they know you can hear and hold their opinion and their disagreement, and you can work through it. So we start with very informal conversations with a wide array of relevant stakeholders, and then some are going to fall away, and that's okay, because then you know that's a need area, and then those others are going to really strengthen, and then you know they're your deep advocates. You know, they're the ones that'll hang with you through the tough times. So that's how we've done this a lot. And then all the parties have a responsibility for the plan. They're dug in, they've already built these relationships, and they have this shared desire to succeed. So we can talk a little bit more how that played out in our development of DBT, or even more recently in our development of a new mission statement. So, but that's kind of an overview. We can go into more detail a little bit. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you both so much for that overview. I'm excited to dive deeper into these conversations with the teams from both Utah and from Bexar County. So with that, I'll kick things over to Michael to get the conversation started with Brett and Jill McKinley from Utah JJYS.
Thanks so much, Christine, and thanks to Brett and Jill for kicking us off. It's really important to be thinking about these strategies within the facility context. Often there is a power differential, whether actual or perceived, between the young people that we're serving and system staff. And so the more that we can work in partnership to build that trust, to build that collaboration, the outcomes will be better, as both of you have indicated. So thank you for setting the context there. And I want to ask you some questions here for the Utah team to get a little bit more into the nitty-gritty of the details. So Brett, you mentioned that your child and family team meetings are a core vehicle to drive and demonstrate this partnership that you have with young people and families. So Jill, let me turn to you to bring you into the conversation. Tell us a little bit more about the child and family team meetings. What are they? What purpose do they serve? How do you view them as a vehicle for really partnering with young people, family, and community?
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Michael. I first wanted to start out and kind of set the stage. I may quote an Eminem song, but you've got one shot, one opportunity. I talked to our staff about this small window of opportunity. First impressions, everything within the first 2 minutes when we meet these families, these supports, the whole facility and everyone they see and come in contact with. So it starts when the family or parents first come to our facility, whether it's the grounds, the way you keep up the landscape as they're driving into our parking lot, the control person engaging with them, talking to them the first time at the door, and then coming into our foyer, the environment, the safe space, the furniture, and the office staff that are the first person to see them. All these things really set the tone for that relationship, for that trust, and for really trying to engage these families in the treatment process. So parents and families play such an integral role in helping and support and enhance the treatment of our youth. And I hate to say this, but back when I started, they were kind of viewed as the problem. And now they're part of the solution. And so when they feel like they can be effectively engaged in the treatment process, even the most challenging families can really become an ally. So with our CFTMs, we really try and hone in that families know these youth the best. Their voice, their information is vital. The youth's information is vital. So we always try and meet the youth and family where they are at with child and family team meetings, at their time, the day. Maybe it's a weekend if they work. It could be a single mom. She might need to do virtual, but we always meet them on their place and their time and really try and implement programming around that. I like to emphasize the family piece because we have so many CFTMs where multiple family members participate, maybe siblings, grandma and grandpa, aunts, uncles. And we're always trying to think outside of the box. You know, if there isn't family, which sometimes there's not, what about a church leader? What about a past coach? I don't care if it's a school bus driver, you know, really trying to get creative to get somebody in there to be this youth's biggest support. So when we get all these key players together, our first child and family team meeting is the initial team meeting. That is done within a week when the child first comes to the facility. And that's why I talk about that first impression. But we invite the youth, the family, the parents, a person of support, the case manager, the clinician. We invite the coach, supervisor, facility director, program coordinator, teachers, ETCA, the nurse, our medical staff, and sometimes even a kitchen staff, as food is a big deal to teenagers and they may have dietary issues or things that we're dealing with. We also have a youth parole authority member, and that YPA is invited to the initial child and family team meeting. The administrative officer, their role is to identify the calculated length of stay, to discuss, you know, the YPA process, including parole, and just to answer any questions that the youth or family may have. This really helps set the stage before the youth's YPA hearing. And then we also have an office staff member that takes notes, very detailed notes, and those notes are sent out to everyone afterwards. We know some information is overwhelming. There's some really hard, tough conversations in these meetings, and not everything sticks. So having detailed notes afterwards with the date of the next meeting is really helpful. And so that is really how we kind of set off our initial child and family team meetings. Who's a part of that? Who's there? And then we carry on monthly. And I think we also start with, you're not stuck. We tell the youth and family, you're just committed to certain patterns of behavior because they've helped you in the past. Now these behaviors have become more harmful than helpful. So the reason why you can move forward is because you keep applying an old formula to a new level in your life. Change the formula, and we're going to help you get a different result together.
Thanks so much, Jill. I love so much of what you said, including the pieces around really kind of our definition of family being broad and bringing in a wide range of supporters that play an important role in the youth's life. I also really appreciate that your CFTMs engage a wide variety of folks from different disciplines. I think it's fascinating that you have your kitchen staff as part of the conversation, but it shows that you're trying to bring in folks from different perspectives and disciplines to support the young person and the family through the process. Give us a little bit of the flavor of the meeting itself. Part of our goal is to make sure that the young person and the family is really in the driver's seat around the decision making, you know, for service delivery and the path moving forward. How do you create the environment within these meetings to allow the young person and the family really to lead, to have a meaningful voice at the table and really contribute to the plans that are created?
I love that. That's such a great question. And we may even have a slide that kind of focuses on the agenda. They're very agenda driven. We don't just shoot from the hip. We don't just talk. And that's what I learned in the beginning. So as a facility director for over 16 years, I was there. I did these team meetings from the inception, being trained and then talking about things. So the other piece that's really important is when a youth first comes to us, they usually have that relationship with their case manager. Some of these youth have worked with the same case manager and their family for years. We really elicit that help. And so that first child and family team meeting and that first agenda that the youth starts working on is really pretty much driven by the case manager and helping them because they know the youth, they know the family, they have that relationship of trust, and they're really being, I think as a team together, we're being intentional. We're being authentic, we're being passionate, and we're really trying to hone in and be curious about things in a non-judgmental way. So as we sit down with the youth to help them with the agenda, these are some of the agenda items that we go over. Again, we ask the youth, what do you want to talk about? What's important to you? What do you think your family wants to talk about? Let's give them a call. Let's do a meeting with your family. Let's talk about what issues. So the agenda is very well thought out in advance. And so I love that. So the youth helps create the agenda, and there's a lot of help with case management in the beginning. And then I noticed initially we had a tendency to just breeze through. People were nervous. They wanted to get on with things, and they just breeze through the agenda information. So I really tried to help with periodic pauses so we can ask for family feedback, anybody else's feedback, and to address any questions they may have. And then the coach will coach the youth and really kind of help them. They sit right next to them, as does the family and the CM. And then we also really look at trying to fill the gaps here. So we have rules, you can see that, ground rules. We do our introductions. We give time over to the school, our ETCA. And then I told you in the first one, this is probably more of a generic. We spend quite a bit of time with the Youth Parole Authority. And then we're also kind of going over our orientation packet. Really any question, there's no question that's not off the table here, because parents are nervous, youth are nervous. They want to know what programming looks like daily. They want to know who they can call at a moment's notice. That's the coach role. There are liaison that are going to have very close contact with the youth and the family, advocating for them. And then, of course, we kind of go through the goals, and you can see all this from the beginning. We talk about transition from day one. When a youth comes in, we want that light at the end of the tunnel. We want to build that momentum, and we want to continue to be very successful in identifying strategies and barriers. So that's kind of part of it, I think, is really being agenda driven, thoughtful, having someone take notes, sending those notes out, and then just continuing to build that relationship and move forward. And then finally, I was going to mention, we get in these meetings, and of course, there could be anyone from the team that's not emotionally regulated, and we may pause and we may do a DBT skill. We may ask the youth, hey, take a deep breath. Is there a DBT skill you'd like to share with us now? Let's do that. And oftentimes at all of our continuing monthly team meetings, we start the meeting off with mindfulness and have the youth and the clinician help us set the stage so that we can all be very mindful in discussing some hard conversations, some hard topics, and being open to answers that the youth and family might not always be on the same page with when it comes to release or way they might go or their guideline, etc. So I hope that helps, Michael.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jill. And folks, if you have questions about the CFTM process, feel free to drop them in the chat. I see that we've got one question already that we'll get back to around transportation. Jill, I know we've got a few more minutes before we turn to the Bexar County team. But you mentioned the coach model that you have in place, and I want to elevate that so that folks who are listening can understand, the fact that you are pairing every young person in the facility with a coach. Tell us a little bit about how that came to be, what it's about, who serves as the coach. This notion of making sure that every young person has the support as they go through the process is critically important. And this is a really promising way of doing that. Tell us more about the coach model.
Yes, I'd love to. This is close to my heart. I even have a picture there that they can share, kind of talking about a good coach can change a game, but a great coach can change a life. And so before a youth even comes to our facility, we are staffing them. Usually we try and do it at least 2 weeks. Sometimes we get some surprise sentencing, as you all know, but we always try and adequately staff these youth before they even come to the facility with as much information as we can from the detention center they're at, from case management, if they have a therapist, the school teacher. So what we're trying to do, Michael, is hone in and be very individual, being very responsive with responsivity to the needs of this youth. It might be an older youth that has a little more maturity, or maybe they're younger. Maybe it's one of our Native American youth, and we're really looking at who we can pull in and what kind of ceremonies or things we can do to tie them back to their culture. We're going to look at our staff and look at the diversity there and really try and match a staff member up to this youth that maybe this youth feels comfortable with. Maybe they feel like they can relate to, and there's some things that they have in common. So we really try and be very intentional and strategic in looking at the youth with the information we have, in selecting who may be the best fit as a coach for them. Now, the role of that coach, it's basically somebody that advocates for the youth daily on the unit, in child and family team meetings, in YPA hearings. They have one-on-ones with them weekly. This is somebody that really knows this youth better than anybody, and they're constantly that conduit between the family, between the case manager. They're in meetings with teachers. You know, they may go to in any of those different settings and represent the youth. They discuss their goals, their dosage with their treatment, skills and usage of those skills. They may role play with the youth or skill stream, and then any additional resources needed. So they're the ones really advocating for this youth. They know this youth the best. But the most important piece is that the youth really knows that they're there for them. The family knows who they can call, who they can reach out to. They're seeing them monthly in the child and family team meetings. They're seeing them in YPA hearings. They're talking to them on the phone if their youth has had an incident, or they're being invited to a high school graduation or a family night. We really are very intentional about making sure that it's all kind of one point person. There's no wrong person, but one point person that everybody can feel very familiar with, and that relationship is built. So that coach is an integral part of the youth success.
I love that. I love that. Last question for you, Jill and Brett. You know, you mentioned the family nights. So a lot of this is, you know, partnering with young people and families so that they're at the table, at the decision-making table, that they're getting the support that they need. But you also have fun, right? You have fun with the young people and families as part of it. So tell us a little bit about those family nights.
Okay, and I'll be quick, and Brett, you jump in too. So we actually have our youth council, and I know that others will talk about that, so I'll skim over. But our youth council members actually plan the family nights. They're the ones that brainstorm what they want to do. If they want to do it outside, if they want to have a barbecue, if they want to do karaoke, if they want to do improv, because the Utah Shakespeare Festival comes in weekly and does improv with them. If they want to do some type of musical concert to show off their skills with their parent. So it is very youth driven. That's the hook. There's the buy-in. And it's our higher level youth. And so it really is something they love and look forward to. And nothing's out of the question. We really try and get creative and have fun at these. But the thing that I love is we always break bread together. In our larger facilities, we partner with our volunteers, our community partners. Our volunteers will rotate in bringing in a full meal for family nights, for all the family members, for the youth, for the staff, and just really kind of sit down and eat a meal together, mingle, talk about things, and then whatever activity is planned for that night. You know, they may just want to do a volleyball game, or they may want to play cards, or whatever it is. But one common theme is demonstration of a DBT skill. We want our families to speak that common language. We want them to understand the skills that their youth are learning, and we want them to be able to help these youth with those skills when they're with us and when they leave, and we do that warm handoff. So it's really important for us to really have the right people there. Case managers come, volunteers come, family members, siblings, and then of course those youth that have made that level. So
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for that overview. That's great. I'm going to transition us to the Bexar County team. Christine will be leading this conversation, but I hope folks who are with us today have taken good notes, and feel free to steal these ideas and implement them in your own jurisdictions. With that, I'll turn it to Christine. Thanks again.
Awesome. Thank you, Michael. So starting our conversation off with the Bayer folks. Jumping right off of actually what Jill McKinley mentioned with the Youth Council, and I know Jill Mata, in your earlier kind of broad overview, you mentioned the Youth Council as well. So I'd love to know kind of a little bit more about that, kind of how the Youth Council started, kind of what its functions looked like, and how it's kind of changed over time.
That's great. That's a really good question. Tamara, you want to kick it off on a discussion of that, and then Jamie can weigh in.
So our youth council, we have had at our facility, oh gosh, it's well over a decade now. And it initially started with us wanting to do some changes within programming, engaging kids and getting their input. I mean, who better to go to? And there have been many a times where we have ideas as adults that we think are great, and our kids remind us that that's not their favorite idea or outcome, and we shift to listening to what they want. So our youth council was developed and still runs today with kids. We have different living units. The kids nominate, they actually campaign on their units, and their unit nominates who their representatives are going to be. And then that group comes together as the council. We have our DBT coaches. We have 2 DBT coaches that are their sponsors. And initially, from years ago, they set up their bylaws, they set up their rules, they set up their meeting schedule, they set up their membership expectations. I remember early on thinking it was so funny because they came back with almost a system that if behaviorally you could not make a meeting, they decided on criteria of how many times you missed that you would be removed from the council and have to be replaced. And Jamie and I giggle because they were really, really harsh on each other, and we had to kind of tell them to dial it down a little bit. They had very high standards for how they wanted to run their group. So they've continued to do that. They will also do their own. I think something unique to them is that they will do their own fundraising. They do concession sales during their visitation time with their families. And then they also oversee how they spend that money. So I remember at first thinking, okay, we're going to allow the kids to decide how to spend these funds. And it's amazing what they come back with. They will host summer end of school parties. They will host summer snow cone days. But they've also done some very genuine things in the sense of they recognize that there were kids that were returning out to the community that didn't have a backpack, didn't have school supplies. So they decided to buy backpacks and school supplies so that as kids left, they would leave with something in hand. They have done clothing drives and been able to take clothes to a local homeless shelter. And they have done blanket drives and taken blankets to a nursing home. And they come up with all of these ideas themselves. And even I love the connection in what we're doing today because our kids are automatically connecting with the community without us having to preface that. They are coming up with it. That need and that want is there underneath all of the other stuff that we're dealing with. So, Jamie, you want to add into how then they tackle into programming?
Sure. When we were first developing our DBT program, we actually had youth council representatives on our work groups alongside the other adults in the facility. And they had direct input into our program development, our scheduling, our activities, and our environmental enhancements. So what types of things they could have in their room, what the units look like, decorations, all of that. One of the biggest points when we were developing our program is we have a daily incentive. And the adults had come up with this really cool idea, and we ordered these handheld Atari games, thinking it would mimic like what they do in the community. You get home from school, do your homework, and you have video game time. And we thought they were really cool. Think kind of like original Atari Pac-Man games. And when we rolled it out, it wasn't working. The kids didn't really like it. They didn't ask for them. They weren't using them. And we went to the youth council and we asked, what's going on? And they said, not to be rude, but those games are not really cool. Those graphics are old. I don't know what to do with just a black and green screen. And so they're like, they're not really cool. And we said, okay, then what do you suggest? What would you like? And they said, we want to have a choice in our day. You know, so many times we just get told what to do and we want to make a choice. And so we came up with this idea of freedom to choose. And they can choose to stay out in the day room during quiet time instead of going in their room, or during board game time, they can choose to just stay in their room instead of coming out and playing. And it's really simple. It didn't cost anything. You can't trade it or gamble it. So it really is this perfect incentive, and the kids will work really hard for it just to have that opportunity to make a choice in their day. So that's one of the most kind of memorable things, since we were so excited about those video games.
Yeah, thank you both. I think that really speaks to kind of the importance of having that sustained feedback loop with the youth in your facility, and kind of having a relationship with them where they feel kind of comfortable sharing those things with you, that like, hey, I might actually not like that very much and prefer something else. So one other question about that, kind of how do y'all promote that kind of relationship with the youth in your facilities? What kinds of supports might you offer them, that might they need, especially on your youth council, to feel comfortable advocating for themselves? And kind of how does that tie into kind of, like I mentioned earlier, your broader culture generally? How do you kind of take the kind of mission and the culture you want to promote and really actionize that so youth are comfortable in the environment and giving their honest feedback with you?
I think one of the things that we do is we address their concerns. We've had chief come out and meet with our youth council, deputies come out and meet with the youth council, and we take their feedback and we implement it. So it's not just kind of a box to check. We actually do some of the things that they suggest. When they come up with list of concerns or questions about things, we discuss them up here in administration, and then I'll go meet with the team, with the group, and go over all of their concerns. If it's something we're not able to do, I explain to them, you know, there's a TJJD guideline that dictates some of what we do in our schedule. So it really helps them understand the process and how things are developed. But we go and we talk to them regularly, and people from various levels in our department come out and talk to them and really value their feedback. So I think them seeing the implementation part of it knows that we are there to really hear and listen to what they have to say.
Yeah, 100%. Another example of that is we adopted a new mission statement recently, and we went and met with the youth council to get their feedback. And we also reached out to parents and children on our caseloads too. But the interesting thing was the way we did it, it's a longer conversation, but the way that we did it, it turned out that there was a lot of similarity between what staff said, what children said, what the youth council said, and what the families in the community. And we asked our external partners, our counselors, external counselor partners. And so the words that were chosen were really all very much the same, probably the same top 10 words. So it was great. So they do see that their opinion matters, and that it has impact on the decision making.
Awesome. I love that. Thank you all for sharing about all of the youth council work you've done. It's super, super impressive. I'm looking at the time. I do want to make sure we talk about y'all's community engagement efforts. I think, Jill, you mentioned in the beginning kind of all the different kind of community partners y'all have engaged with to make sure you have a community of care that's there for your youth while they're engaged with you, but also once they return to their community. So if y'all don't mind speaking a little bit about kind of how you've built those relationships with those community-based providers and how you've kind of maintained them over time.
You know, we've had a deep network of community participants, so we had a good well to draw from, but we've worked really hard to maintain those, grow those, and expand. And I think a good example, just for a real practical example, is the reentry court that we were doing. So if so that we don't lose time for that, I would love y'all, Jamie, to talk about the reentry court and how that was set up.
A reentry court docket has been going on for about a couple of years now. And again, it started with coming to youth council, talking to them about things that were incentivizing them, their concerns in the community. And then also the department did a survey of kids who were post-discharge from the facility about a year out. So they've had time to adjust into the community and it not be so new, and kind of figure out what works and what doesn't work. and a variety of themes popped up. One of the themes was this idea of wanting to keep the connection with their placement clinician. That they had done all of this work, and transitioning to a new clinician is difficult because it's a new modality, a new person, you have to tell your story all over again. And that was definitely a challenge. And while they couldn't keep their prior clinician in the community, what we did is we brought in community partners, the agencies that we work with in reentry earlier on in the process. So they really see them as part of their placement team as well as their transition team. So very early on, within the first 45 days, we identify who that provider is going to be. And that provider makes an initial introduction to the child, to the family, and starts working with the family and preparing for a discharge. And then towards the end of their stay, they come back in and transition with their placement clinician. One of the most important things is our reentry providers were all trained in DBT by our DBT consultant that trained us. So the kids aren't learning a new language, a new modality. They're not having to redo all of their behavior chains and all of that and start over. So they come in and they have a warm handoff meeting with their placement clinician where they review all of those things together. And then that reentry clinician starts to meet with them a few times before they go into the community.
We're really trying to make DBT really something that everybody's using. And so we're really trying to expand that with our community partners a lot. And that beginning with the end in mind is something that we very much heard in our CJJR participation, you know, with our certificate programs that have been very helpful.
Awesome. Thank y'all for that. I think it's awesome that you kind of used youth voice to kind of drive the creation of kind of all of that. I think that's really, really great, and driving the other kind of partnerships that you make to make sure it's directly linked to youth's needs. I think is really, really incredible. We only have a couple minutes left, so I do want to make sure we chat about y'all's kind of approach to problem solving that Jill mentioned earlier, because I think it's unique, and your kind of comfortability with chaos and the way you kind of bring a bunch of different stakeholders to the table. So if you don't mind kind of talking about how you balance the opinions of all these stakeholders and kind of why this is your approach to kind of how you solve problems or challenges.
I think we found if we weren't facing, if the problems wouldn't arise and we'd pretend like they weren't there, they would come back to harm us later, and it would slow us down. So it's much better if you just have a very vulnerable kind of open conversation about what might be a problem. A good example of that is going on right now. So I want Tamara to talk a little bit about that with our school district partner.
Yes, so as Michael mentioned earlier, we were a part of the Youth in Custody capstone back in 2017. So we partner with our local school district that provides our school here. Since that time frame, with COVID in the middle of that, we've actually gone through 4 different principals of our school that's out here. So staff changes and things that have just gotten lost in the process. So we're working now very closely with our principal and the school district here. And one of the pieces that we're actually building in that we hadn't really focused on and is in capturing a community partner, a nonprofit, is a group called Celebrate Dyslexia, and having to what the grant that's focusing on is trying to identify learning disabilities, specifically reading disabilities, specifically dyslexia. Research shows that dyslexia ratings are high and consistent through juvenile and adult systems. And so it's trying to flag those kids as they're coming into placement, so that then while in placement, our school district can work with those kids, do further assessments, get diagnosis in place, and get services, possibly special education or 504 services set up, with the goal that when they leave us, they now have conquered kind of, which is a huge bump in the road for any kiddo that's out in the world in education, especially our kids that might be overlooked or missed, that they leave with those services already in their hands, and school districts are ready to go to receive them. and it is, we are in the very early stages of it. It is, it's now involving another partner that we have that does our psychological testing before kids come here, who is working to adjust their testing modalities to include assessments that are going to be accepted by the school. And then also working with those continued services when they leave. So we're kind of right in the middle of one of these, right now where it can be bumpy and everybody's kind of got their place, and we're just hitting it head on. That's it's just as clear as that, as our chief said, that we just kind of recognize it and recognize the obstacles up front. And then, but everybody at the end of the day is, you can't not be on board to want to support our kids in their education. I mean, it's definitely a common goal that everybody can buy into.
And reiterating that common goal over and over again is sort of when we see the conflict arise, we go back to, now, why are we here? Why are we all here? What is our, and, you know, it sort of can reset the stage in those conversations.
Absolutely. Yeah, having that common vision and goal is so, so important. Looking at the time, I know we want to leave a little bit of time for questions, so I'll go ahead and shift things over to Michael to go into our Q&A section. Thank you all from Bexar County so much. That was an awesome conversation.
Yes, thank you so much. That was wonderful. Yeah, we've got a couple of questions in the chat. Let's go right into it. One is around transportation, common barrier, getting families to the facilities. How have you navigated, to the extent that that's a challenge in your jurisdictions? How have you done that? And actually, we have a comment in the chat saying in New Jersey that there was a recent solicitation to fund transportation services for families to visit their children. So that is absolutely wonderful. But folks in Utah or in Bexar County, how have you worked to support families who may not have transportation to get to the facilities?
So I'll jump in really quick here. This is kind of exciting, and especially where we have youth placed all over the state. I know that's other cases too. We really try and be strategic about planning and really trying to build off of things. For example, if their youth may have a parole hearing, we may do family night the night before the parole hearing, but we really try and be strategic about making the most bang for their buck when they come, right? We also will help with transportation through our case managers. We also will help pay for a hotel room. We truly understand there are a lot of barriers with transportation. Some parents don't have a car. There may not be a bus system that runs clear down to Cedar City in southern Utah. We have to get creative. We've even had case managers pick up some family members and bring them with them. Nothing is off the table, but you really have to think outside the box and how you can make it worth their time and get as many things in, or at least look at ways that you can help support them if they don't have transportation or the money to pay for gas or a hotel room, etc.
For us, we don't have a bus line that's out here by our facility. So for our family nights and game nights, we use a department vehicle and have the parents meet us at the probation office or the detention center, and we bring a van of parents out here to the facility and then take them back to that point.
Thanks so much. We've certainly heard in our engagement with jurisdictions who do provide transportation in the way that you described that there's this perhaps unintended benefit of when your staff are driving families to the facility, it fosters this relationship building because there's all this time in the vehicle where folks can get to know one another and better understand one another. So that's great. We have another question here around gang affiliated youth. So the question is, with respect to your youth councils, do you see any trends of gang leaders being the young people who are actually involved in the youth council? Really interesting question, because we know that gang affiliated youth can demonstrate strong leadership. Have you seen a connection? And if so, how do you handle that? Are you working with those young people to teach them to use their skills, perhaps in more positive ways?
I think
I'll take
definitely.
Oh,
sorry.
sorry.
Yeah.
I was just saying real quickly for us, I think the core of it is, I mean, to be on the youth council, they have to be demonstrating, higher levels of behavior. So they have to have move up through our behavior change process. And if they're demonstrating those skills and they're working on it, I mean, we've had kids say to us like, oh, I'm just gaming the system by showing off these skills. And we're like, you just keep on gaming it, buddy. Like, you just keep doing that practice of demonstrating good skills. So I think it's the same. Like, yeah, almost all our kids have some type of gang affiliation. I mean, not in some of our facilities. I shouldn't say all across the board, but it's very common. And so for us, we definitely, that's not anything we exclude by any means. Certainly they have gang affiliation, and if they have leadership traits, great. Like, that's a positive thing we can build on. And it's a potential opportunity for us to see them grow and start using it, like I said, in a positive way.
We have that same approach. Definitely, we do see the gang leaders from time to time are the ones kind of rising up into those positions, but also pointing out the impact they've had, that positive pro-social impact they've had on their immediate community and then the community at large to help with those skills.
Using those poetry programs is an interesting idea too, because it comes out a lot in their poetry or spoken word, and it's an opportunity also to talk about, because the poetry they can't just write anything, so it has to be pro-social, but it can talk about their experiences, and it's an interesting way to have conversation about the consequences of their gang involvement.
Same with our murals in Utah. I mean, just having some of our gang-related youth be involved in that. I mean, they're structured and they're beautiful. And whether it's one kind act a day, these are beautiful paintings and pictures on our walls in our facilities. And some of our gang members are the most involved, motivated, and create some of the most beautiful things.
Thanks to everybody. One last question. I think this is for the Bear team. I'm seeing in the chat, affirmation for the work that you're doing around the continuity of care, particularly with your clinicians. There's a specific question here. How are you funding community clinicians to be involved from the beginning all the way through reentry?
Well, I will tell you, we go after a lot of grants, and we have been real successful getting OJJDP grants, and we just got a great one right now on building local continuum of care. One way that we've built relationships with our community stakeholders is we often, if we identify grants, we tell them about them. We write letters of support for them. We really cooperate with them and help them get grants along with us getting those grants. And then we kind of watch out for each other. So we've had many rotations or cycles of grants where that's worked. There's actually a lot of money out there. It's just a little bit of work to get it. But I would say the current OJGDP, I mean, they're really wanting to fund and support these sort of initiatives. And you don't even really have to have a fancy outside grant writer. I mean, you just have to, there's a lot of other grants you can look at and kind of borrow some of that language as it fits to your project. So I think that's a great way to start. Thanks,
Joe. Well, we are at the top of the hour. I want to thank all of our panelists for this great conversation. We hit the tip of the iceberg here, folks. So we look forward to continuing to work with all of you. We do want to note there is an opportunity that we're offering to the field here at Georgetown, which is our Youth in Custody Certificate Program. And as I mentioned, both of these teams will be featured as part of the instruction team in this program. So if you enjoyed what you heard today and you're interested in convening a team to come be with us for a week in the nation's capital, please consider being with us. These programs are amazing because we bring teams from jurisdictions all across the country, and they're great opportunities for peer-to-peer learning, in addition to the exposure to the instructors that we bring, lifting up important dimensions of practice and policy within the facility setting. Our Youth in Custody Certificate Program will happen the week of July 15th here in Washington, D.C. Applications are due by April 26th. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to our team. Amber Farn is a good person to reach out to. She's our Deputy Director for Certificate Programs. Her email address is amber.farn@georgetown.edu. Christine has just placed that in the chat. Thank you, Christine. In the meantime, feel free to look at our webpage. You see the QR code and the direct link there to learn more about the program. But I want to thank our friends and our partners from Bexar County and from Utah, not only for sharing the great work that you're doing, but for leading it in partnership with young people and families and communities. We want more and more agencies to emulate these types of policies and practices. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And we appreciate you all. Please be in touch. Thanks again for being with us, and stay tuned for the recording of this webinar. We will be making it publicly available as well. Take care all.